How can there be understanding if what happens in the mind is caused by brain states relating causally to each other? How is it possible that this series of events happening causally can understand something? There's a famous objection saying that it cannot be understanding in such a case, and that's the Chinese room. It's a thought experiment suggested by John Searle, philosopher. And it says that imagine a room where there's a person, and he receives messages with Chinese symbols on them. They come into the room, and when he gets them, he looks up into a big book, finds a similar symbols, and with an instruction: if you get these and these symbols, then you can put out these and these symbols. So he puts the different Chinese symbols on a piece of paper and sends them out of the house again. For people sending in these notes, they are questions in Chinese, and they get answers that make perfect sense. And so they think that the person inside the room understands Chinese, but in fact the person does not understand Chinese. It's just looking up in a big instruction book without understanding anything. And Searle then argues that this shows that semantic is more than syntax, or understanding is more than just a causal process where symbols are being manipulated, as in a computer. This was meant as a thought experiment showing that computers cannot understand, and that humans, they have something extra in addition. So what should we think of this? What is understanding? We looked at that previously, and I said that understanding something is to place it in a larger theoretical framework. And we can make a distinction between understanding persons or understanding the world. So if we're understanding persons, we need to understand what they say or put it in a larger framework. And if that matches the framework that they are putting it in, it's related or placed in the same way as them, then we understand them. So let's say you talk to a friend who says, I got lucky with hunting last night. And maybe you think that he's talking about shooting animals in the forest, but he's actually talking about trying to meet some women in a pub. Then you misunderstand. But if you understand it in the same framework as the one you're talking to, then you understand the person. Same with understanding something in the world. If you see a spark plug, for instance, and you think it belongs in a car motor, then you understand it. If you think it should be in the TV set, then you misunderstand it because you placed it in the wrong larger framework. Okay then, so why does not the man in the Chinese room understand Chinese? It's because he's not able to put these symbols into a larger framework. But he could have been if there were windows in the room, if we could look outside, look at what people were doing when they sent some and looking at how they responded, etc. We can imagine that he could gradually start to understand these symbols and learn what they meant. Especially if we add some details. So that's what I'm going to do here, because in answering, I'm actually combining two common responses to the Chinese room thought experiment. The first common response is the system response, which says that, well, the man doesn't understand Chinese, but the whole Chinese room understands Chinese, because we need to look at the system as a whole. So people defending then that computers can understand, they will say, well, one piece of a computer doesn't understand, but the whole computer can understand. And in the same way, the man in the house doesn't understand, but the whole room understands, because the whole room with the book and everything responds correctly to the Chinese symbols coming in. But then Searle rejects this response and says, well, imagine the person inside learning by heart the whole instruction book and everything, and just doing everything himself, so that the man becomes the whole system. Still, he would not understand Chinese. So that's Searle's response to the system's response. But there's also the robot response, which says that, well, the man in the house, that's just like a brain, but the brain alone can't understand. You need a body as well. So if it had been a robot, if the house had arms and legs, etc., and could interact with persons in the world, then that robot, the Chinese robot, could understand Chinese. But Searle, he responds to this robot response and says, well, imagine then again the person inside having learned all the instructions and being able to control, knowing now I now I move the arms like this, and now I move the legs like this, etc. He could become the whole robot, but still he would not understand Chinese. What I'm doing, or what I'm suggesting, is that we combine these two responses. So imagine now the man in the house, and the house is like a robot, but the robot also has sensors, so he can see through the windows and see what people are doing when they are sending in some messages, and he reacts by doing something, and he sees how people respond to how he acts, etc. Then this interaction with other persons would make it possible gradually to place the Chinese signs into a larger framework and understand the meaning of them. So this demonstrates the point with understanding being to relate it to a larger framework. But I will also add what I said in the previous video. For a full understanding of understanding in the full sense would include intentionality, that it could be, you understand, to understand something is to have thoughts about something, which means that consciousness is required in addition. So if you have a non-conscious robot or a non-conscious man only inside this room, it wouldn't be understanding in the full sense. It needs to be conscious as well for there to be a subject who understands. So we'll come back to that in the chapter on consciousness, but I'll say there is this parallel now that we could think of the brain in the skull as a Chinese room. The neurons, they're like blind neurons inside this skull, but they get messages through the different senses that they respond to. And if they were always non-conscious, there would none of these physical parts would have understanding. But in fact, the brain has managed to connect to consciousness in a way that gives you the conscious subject that can understand, and that we'll look at how that has happened in the chapter on consciousness, how the brain managed to get connected to consciousness. But adding that would be my then starting answer to how there can be understanding in a Chinese room, or how there could be understanding then, even if thinking in the mind is a causal process.